Daf Yud Dalet Amud Aleph, the Mishnah at the top of the Amud. The Mishnah and the next few Dafim of the Gemara are going to discuss the dinam of Tumah Tahara. And the reason that it's brought in at this point is because we're talking about Erev Pesach, we're talking about burning chometz. Now the question is, can you burn chometz? The chometz has to be burned. Can you burn the Truma Tameya with the Truma Tahara? Now we have in Isser on burning or even being metame truma, which is tahir, and we have an isser of being metame kachim. However, on Erev Pesach by Shasi isser, they have to be destroyed anyway. So the question is there an isser now to further be metame the truma? Is there an isser to, it's going to be burnt? Can you be metame? In this case, can you be metame the truma tar, or can you increase the levels of tuma for the truma, because it's going to be destroyed anyway? Now, as a general introduction to the hilchas tuma, we know that there's an ava tuma, there's a vlada tuma, there's avisa tuma, for instance, in the vela, there's a sheretz. If a person comes into contact with them, he becomes tome, or automakelim, or food, or drink, they all become tome. These are ava tuma. Whoever comes or whatever comes into contact with them will be considered a vlada tuma, not the father, not the source of it, but the offshoot of it, the offspring of it. So the av is the source. What comes into contact with the av is a vlad, is a rishon tuma. What comes into contact with the rishon is a sheni. Sheni is shlishi revi, and it goes down the line. Now in chulin, if we're talking about things that are chulin food, which is chulin, it only goes to the level of a sheni. Truma goes to the level of a shlishi, and kochim goes to the level of a revi. These go down the line that way. A mess is a via voisa tuma. So what comes, a person comes into contact with a mess, he becomes an avatuma, and it goes down the line. So as we said, it's also to be matame truma tahira, it's also to be matame kochim, it's also even to increase the level of tuma for truma and kochim. However, if we have cases where the kochim have to be burnt, or where the truma has to be burnt, is then a problem in those cases of increasing the level of tuma. It has to be destroyed anyway. And therefore, on Erev Pesach, is there a problem in burning together and bringing into contact together truma tahira with truma tameya? So look at the Mishnah. Rabbi Chanina Skana Kanim Omer. The Rabbi Chanina was the Skana Kanim. He was the deputy Kohen Gadol. He was the second in command to the Kohen Gadol. He said, Mimeim Shel Kahanim, from all the days of the Kahanim, in all the days that the base of Mikdash was Kayim, Lo nimnu melisra v'sabasar shenit v'velada tuma ima basar shenit ba'ava tuma. If you have meat of kochim that was nitma with a vlada tuma, so it's tome. Now it's not the highest level of tuma, it's not an av, it's not a rishon, it's a sheni. The vlad is a rishon, it came into contact with the rishon, it becomes a sheni. Nevertheless, if it had to be burned because it's tome, they did not refrain themselves from burning it in basar shenit b'avatuma, with basar of kochim that came into contact with an avatuma, which is a rishon. So they burned together the rishon and the sheni, and even though afal pi shemaisifim tuma tumasa, even though they're increasing the level of tuma, they still did not refrain or restrain themselves from burning it together. So what do we see over here? We see over here that even though you cannot increase the level of tuma for truma and kochim, but once it's tome anyway, and once it's going to be destroyed anyway, then there is not a problem. It's not a problem to increase the level of tuma. The Gemara is going to ask that, well, how are you increasing the level of tuma over here? How are you increasing the level of tuma? Is the basar that's nitma be'avatuma is a rishon. The basar that's nitma with a vlada tuma is a sheni. If the sheni comes into contact with the rishon, it's still going to be a sheni. You're not increasing the level of tuma. You're not giving it a higher level of tuma. So what are we referring to over here when we say afal pi shemaisifim tuma tumasa? So the more we'll discuss that and we'll see what the case is. Rabbi Kiva added and said to that, Mimeim shel kahanim, and all the times of the kahanim, lo ninim lahadlik sashem, shenifsa b'tful yaim, they did not restrain themselves from burning the shemen of truma that was nifsa b'tful yaim. We'll see, define that in a minute. But together, bener shenitma b'tomei meis, in a lamp that was been tomei from a tomei meis. So, truma, as we said, truma can reach a level of shlishi. Truma can reach a level of shlishi. A tful yaim is somebody who was tomei. He went to the mikveh, but he did not yet have Erev Shemesh. It's not yet nightfall. So now, even though he will not, this person, since he already was toivel in the mikveh, will not be matama chulin, but he will passel truma. He will make truma into a shlishi. He makes it into a shlishi. Why do we use this lashon of posel and not tomei? It's used a lashon of posel and not tomei because he can make the truma into a shlishi, but that cannot go further. It cannot become it makes the truma into a shlishi, but it doesn't make it and will not make it into a revi. So it stops over there. It pasels it, but it won't be matamed. It can't carry it, the truma, further. So what do we see over here? We see over here that there's oil that's nifsal b'tful yaim. So the oil was oil of truma. It came into contact with the tful yaim, so it's a shlishi. And yet they burnt it together with an air shenitma with tmei meis, and the nair that was nipper with the tmei meis. So even though the nair was a rishon, it came into contact with a meis, and a person who was tomei from a meis, so he came into contact with a rishon, with an av, and the nair is a rishon. So now, even though you're putting into contact the shlishi with the rishon, thereby making it into a sheni, and therefore increasing the level of tumah, nevertheless, they did not restrain themselves from doing that. So you see, therefore, even though you're increasing the level of tumah, you have the nair, which is a rishon, who came into contact with a person who was a tomei meis, who was an av, so the nair is a rishon, and the oil was a shlishi, came into contact with the tful yaim. So now you turn that shlishi into a sheni, you increase the level of tumah. Nevertheless, since it has to be burnt anyway, since it's tomei, also it has to be burned, then there's no problem in increasing the level of tumah. So therefore, coming to our point, we learn, therefore you can learn out that Erev Pesach you can burn together the truma tahira with the tmeya. Now, even though it's also to be metama the truma tahira, and now if you burn them together, you're going to put them in contact with each other. So the truma, which is tahira, comes into contact with the tmeya, will become tame, which normally is also. But since you are burning it, it has to be burnt anyway. We can learn out from the case of kachim that there's no problem. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, "Eina, this is eina himida. This is not a comparison. You can't learn out one from the other. We'll see in the Gemara what Rabbi Yossi means and why is that so." So he says, no, you cannot learn out from the case of kachim to the case of truma. However, Rabbi Yossi continues, but however, Umaydim Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, they do agree, and we'll see what this machlekes is in a moment, but they said, Moedim Rabbi Elazar Yeshua, they do agree, Shesarfim Zulatz or Zulatzma, even though they argue on the following case, but in this case of what we just discussed about Truma, Tahira, and Tamei, they both agree, you can't burn it together. You can't be Metama, the Truma, which is Tahira. So that they agree on. That they have to be burned separately. Alman nechlaku, where is the machlekes? Where do they disagree? They disagree on truma, which is tmeya, which is tluya, which is a suffix, literally suspended. It's a suffix if it's tmeya. Rabbi Elazar says, even in this case, even though the one which is tluya also has to be burnt, he says, nevertheless, you cannot. He said, we're going to put them together because it might not be Tameya, and it might not, now you're going to be making it into something which is Tomei, so therefore it's also. But Yeshua says, no, that they can be burnt together. They can be turned together, because since you can't eat the truma, which is a tzui, which is a suffix, and therefore that the use of it is to be burnt for fuel. So therefore, since they're going to be burnt anyway together, therefore you can burn it together. So if you look at the Gemara so going back to the case of Kach, we said that Rav Chanina's Kohanim said that they didn't restrain themselves from burning together the Kachim, the Basar Shenitma with a Vlada Tuma with an Avatum. So Basar Shenitma with Vlada Tuma, my Hava, what is that? Well, if it came into contact with a Vlada with a Rishon, what is it? It's a Sheni. It's a Sheni. So Kisarf Lebahani Basar Shenitma Avatuma, if he burns it together with meat that came into contact with an avatuma, well, what is meat that came into contact with an avatuma? Is a rishon. So my avi. So if the sheni comes into contact with a rishon, the rishon doesn't make the other meat into a rishon; it makes it into a sheni. So it's a sheni, sheni. So it remains the same. You're not increasing the level of tuma. It's the same. It's a sheni v'sheni. My Masechet like tumal tumaseka. What does it mean that says you burn it? They burn together, even though they're being Masechet. They're adding tuma to the tuma. There's what kind of being Masechet over here? There's not adding anything. It was a sheni. It remains a sheni. Amar Yehuda, he says hakam b'vlad askinan. He said what we're talking about over here is no, not by the vlad, with a vlad, meaning that it came into contact with a vlad of a vlad. The vlad is a rishon, the vlad is a sheni, so the meat is a shlishi, and it came into contact with the rishon, so now you're turning the shlishi into a sheni, so you are increasing the level of tuma. Davale shlishi, because over shlishi mutal asois sheni, and he holds that even though now you're increasing the level of tuma, it's mutter to make the shlishi into a sheni. It's mutter to do. Nevertheless, they burnt it together. Frankly, Gemara, no, but even in such a case, even if you tell me it's a vlad, what kind of increase in the level of tuma is there? One food can't be matama another food. Now, even though we say that a rishon can make a sheni shlishi, but one food can't be matama another food. So what does it change to be matama food? Meaning, a person who's tameh then can be matama food or kela. A food, now if the food is a sheni, or a rishon, or a sheni, or even a shlishi, we're talking about truman kachim, that food that touches another food does not transmit the tumah. Minatayra, at least, Minatayra does not transmit the tumah. If it touches a liquid, it'll make the liquid tameh, and a liquid touches the liquid will make the food tameh. But the food to a food, or a liquid to a liquid, is not matameh. Because as we learned, we learned in the Brisa, you might think that food can transmit tuma to another food. It says in the Torah that if water is placed on a zera, a seed, and then an avela comes into contact with it, it's tameh. So this is the end of hechsher lekabel tuma. Before something can become tameh, it has to come into contact with the 7 liquids. So if it comes into contact with the 7 liquids, it is tameh. It's hechsher lekabel tuma, and it can be because susceptible to tuma. It can be kabel tuma. If it comes into contact with an avela, it'll be matameh. So it says in the pasuk that if it comes into contact with a liquid, it says tameh hu. So it is tameh. Hu tameh. So it is tameh. It can make something, it is tameh, and it makes this thing tameh, but it can't make something else like it. It can't make something else in the same category, which has the same nature. It can't make something else. It's tameh. So, therefore, this is tameh, but this tameh item cannot make another food tameh. It can make something different tameh, but not a food, not something which is its own nature. So, therefore, as Ramam Chalal explains, and we'll see it from the Gemara Vayter. And therefore, the food cannot be matama another food. It can be matama liquid. A liquid cannot be matama another liquid because that's of the same nature. A food can be matama liquid, and a liquid can be matama food. So therefore, in this case over here, even if you say that we're talking about the boss of Kachim, that's Avatuma together with a Vlad, meaning it's a Rishon with a Shlishi, how is it still going to make the Shlishi into Sheni? Now, that we say that food cannot be matama food, that's only by chulin. But by truma kachim, it can. A food of kachim can be matama another food of kachim, or truma with truma. So therefore, then we cannot understand it, because we're talking here about kachim. So the shlishi will become a sheni through coming into contact with the basar kachim, which is a rishon. Now, even u'laravada barava mishmei the Rav and nami domer, it's also, we understand it according to him, because even though he says leishan el chulin truma, he says, where do we say food does not transmit truma to another food? That's by chulin, even by truma. But by kachim, it will transmit the it will transmit it shapir. Then it's also fine, because he says that by kachim food will be matam another food, and now we're talking about kachim, so we can understand how the basar of kachim rishon can make the shlishi into a sheni. That the pasuk is unqualified. It's talking that across the board, whether it's chulin or kachim or truma, in all of these cases, we say that the food is not matam of the food. It does not make something of its same nature into, it's not matam. What are you going to say? In our Mishnah, how does the basar of kachim, which is the rishon that comes into contact with the shlishi, how does it make it into a sheni? The Gemara answers, we're talking over here where the basar also had a liquid on it. So therefore, the kamatama machas mashkim. As we said, the food cannot be matama the food, but it could be matama liquid. So the food came into contact with a liquid, which came into contact with the basar. Frank the Gemara, so, but it says in the Mishnah that it came into contact with the meat. But if this is the case, it should say that it came into contact with the liquid. It should be in contact with both of them. Ella, the Gemara says, but however, this is a din deraisa, that food is not matama another food. But he says, the Rabbanon, nevertheless, it is matama. So we're talking over here in the Mishnah that it's increasing the tuma level. The Rabbanon increases the tuma level, but nevertheless, they burnt the two together, and based on that, that's the issue. Can we draw an analogy from that, and therefore learn out that on Erev Pesach, can you burn together the truma tahara with the tmeya?